BibleWorm, BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and the founding pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, director of lifelong learning at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week we return to our study of the Narrative Lectionary by going all the way back to the creation story in Genesis 2 and 3. We discuss what it means that human beings are made of dust and breath and ponder our relationship to plants, animals, and the earth. We wrestle with the tree of knowledge of good and evil and why it is that such knowledge seems so troubling for humankind. We wonder about the serpent in the garden and ask whether it was ever possible that Eden was going to work in the first place. And we think about humans hiding our true selves from God, embarrassed to be only what God created us to be. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, welcome to Season 2.
We're back. We're here.
We are. So exciting.
It's surprisingly weird to start Season 2. We didn't take that long of a break, but I feel like we've been, in this outside land, where are you in the lectionary? We're nowhere. We're floating, and now we've dropped back into it.
Yeah, it is like a little homecoming, because we really haven't been in the Narrative Lectionary since May.
In a minute, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so now we're back. We're with everybody. We're all on the same page. It's pretty exciting. This time last year, neither you nor I had ever A, worked with the Narrative Lectionary, or B, done a podcast.
True story.
And so now we're like old pros at this. We're second time through the Narrative Lectionary. I mean, it's totally different text this year, but we at least know kind of how it goes. And we still don't know what we're doing with podcasting. but
no, we don't. Do not raise your expectations.
Yeah, but we roll it out. With that said, we're on our first text for the 2020-21 Narrative Lectionary, Season 2 of the BibleWorm.
And we are back to the beginning, Bobby.
We are all literally. Well, not literally, because we haven't done Genesis 1 so far, but...
I know, but it's still creation.
We are back to creation. It is true.
We're back to creation.
So this week we're going to be in the book of Genesis, all the way back in the creation story. We're going to kind of skip around a little bit according to the Narrative Lectionary. So we'll be in 2:4 through 8, then 15 to 17, and then 3:1 to 8. I'm reading the NRSV, and you're reading...
I am reading the NJPS.
All right, let's get to it. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. That's such a familiar little bit of text. And I'm just curious, when you read it now, what jumps out to you as important?
The first thing that came into my head, reading this text this time around, is this sort of inherent interdependence of humans being on Earth, and plants growing. There's this assumption that those things work together. And so there are not plants in the earth because there's not a human who can care for the plants.
Right.
Which then raises the question for me, if you were God, Bobby, that's always a good way to start something out, right? If you were God and you were creating something, why wouldn't you just create something that doesn't have to be tilled? You know what I mean? Why are you building work into this already? Well, if you're creating it from scratch, why don't you just put it on autopilot? It times itself and,
That would be amazing. My wife and I just planted a new flower bed in our front yard.
Oh, man. It would be so much easier.
If that thing were self-pruning, that would be amazing.
Go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I would love it if God had decided to do that. and we could just sit around and watch Netflix all day, which is what I mean.
Yeah, and have those auto vacuums vacuum your house. Everything's like automatic, and we could just lay around in our own filth. No, but really, like it pulls me back to this point, this thought that there is something valuable in the interdependence of humans and the plant world.
I like that a lot. You know, where I was going to go was sometimes I say it's better. Sometimes it's better to read the text from the earth up instead of from the heaven down. By which I mean, instead of saying, why would God do this? The question is, why would a human write a text in which God does this?
Yes, I know.
In which case the answer is something like, well, I mean, that's the way the earth is, and so that's the way they wrote it. But your response to that is so much richer than that, in the sense of I really like that way of thinking about it theologically, that God intentionally created a world in which things depend on each other. And so humans and plants have an intrinsic relationship that would not be there if there were simply self-pruning plants and people who had no responsibility for the earth. So I really love that in that sense, God is establishing a relationship here between humans and the creation. I love that. Thinking about that word that is used for the being that is created here. So the word there is Adam, which is why we call this guy Adam, right? Is because that the word used here for him is Adam. Two things about that. One is that the word Adam really does not refer to a biological male. It refers to a human being. And so one could make a choice about that, translating that word to say God formed a human being from the ground. And instead of making him gendered male, you could make them kind of an ungendered human. And I think there's an interesting choice to be made about that. Later on in this text that we're not going to read today, but when God forms the woman from the rib of the human, then for the first time you get the words ish and isha, you get the words biological male, biological female. And so one way of reading it is the traditional way, which is there is a man who was created and woman was taken from him. But there's also a way of reading it that I find richer, which is to say there was a gender undifferentiated human being who was created here at the beginning. And then later in the text, that human being was separated into the male human being and the female human being. So that was kind of the first place I went, which is kind of maybe a weird place to go with this text, but...
No, I don't think it's a weird place at all. I mean, I think I tend to go there more when we start reading about Ish and Isha, but I think, that's a really important thing to talk about. What is this human being who's been created? And because gender and gender roles get layered on it so soon after this, I think it's really important from the beginning to say, like, yes, this is a human being of all genders or no gender, or it's all human beings sort of wrapped up into one and eventually is separated out. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that distinction.
Thinking about what you were saying about the relationship of human beings and plants in this text, I also think there is, like, if you follow that line that we were just talking about, just one step further, there is something there about human beings intrinsically belong to one another, that we are meant to be connected with other human beings. And one can read that in this kind of gender complementarian way, like man and woman belong together, but I don't think the text really insists on that in any kind of a way. It's more that people need people. Like we are built for community, whether it's family structures or community structures, whatever they are. We're meant to belong to each other. And when you get that kind of initial human being who then is separated into other human beings, which doesn't quite happen exactly in the text that we're reading today, but it's sort of implied by that word Adam. Like, I think there's something. Yeah. So we've got the relationship of human beings and plants, and then with the relationship of human beings to each other.
And then can I layer one more thing on top of what you just said? I thought you were going to say what I was thinking, and you said half of it, so I'll say the other half. When we read that text of Adam being separated into two beings and have that sense that humans belong to each other, I also want to point out that Adam is created from Adamah, is created from the dirt, from the dust of the earth, like formed out of the earth. And so just as the second human is made from the rib of the first human, and that makes us think they are of one piece, humans are created from the earth. And so
Yeah.
we are also of one piece with the earth. I have to write a little, not quite like a liturgy, but like a thing, I don't know, a script for a spiritual hike for my community. Part of what I have in there is talking about Adam and Adamah, and this like trying to stand on the earth and envision that you are created, you are molded, sculpted from the earth, and like there's no, like you're of one piece with it. There's no division between the bottom of your feet and the earth beneath you. You're just like a big mud person.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being a mud person? That's what I would like you to imagine in this spiritual hike. No, I'll work on my language a little bit, make it a little more spiritual.
No, I like that a lot, a mud person. You know, I think one of the first jokes that I ever made on BibleWorm was not even my joke. It was the joke of our dear Professor John Hayes of blessed memory, who used to say that if you really wanted to read this text in English, you would call the first human, you wouldn't call him Adam, you would call him Dusty.
Dusty.
Because his name in Hebrew, Adam, gives that relationship to the dirt, Adamah. And so in English, Dusty kind of gets that same. And so in that sense, really a mud being. That's what it's saying.
Yeah.
We are mud creatures. So we're starting out this text with these kind of interesting, like it's a very highly relational text.
It is a highly relational text, yeah.
Humans are created for the plant world. Humans are created out of the dirt. Human beings are intrinsically connected to other human beings. And so and we're not going to read about the animals this time. If you want to talk about the animals, go back to BibleWorm episode 1. If you can stay on the sound quality, we talked about it for a while there from last September. But animals are created in this text as companions for human beings, essentially. So we've got this highly relational world.
Yeah.
Now, on what you were saying just there about human beings are essentially mud creatures, we get in verse 7, God formed the human from the dust of the ground and breathed into the human's nostrils the breath of life. So there's a couple things there. The one I want to ask you about first is, so humans are dirt creatures, but they are not animated beings until God breathes into their nostrils. So we're some combination of dust and breath. Any thoughts about how we might interpret that?
The thought that comes to my mind is connecting back actually to the first creation story, which the Narrative Lectionary hasn't given us yet, maybe next year, in Genesis chapter 1, where it talks about either a strong wind or a wind of God, a ruach Elohim that sort of blows over creation, in this sense that there is this divine energy or breath sort of flowing over the planet, and that's what enlivens us. And so then I sort of see that language picked up. You know, Genesis 1 it doesn't have this idea of a God who's like forming things and breathing on things and walking around in the forest. Like, it's a very different sense of the nearness of God and sort of how God shows up in the world. But both creation stories have this sense of some kind of God's breath animating creation, which is pretty incredible.
And so when you think of it that way, then there is something in human beings that comes from God, is gifted to us by God. In some ways, it seems to be something that God has also. And so in this thinking about these relationships that we've been talking about, there is this really kind of intimate relationship between humankind and God.
Yeah.
So one thing that's worth noting is that while the text does not say specifically that God breathed breath into animal life, the word that's used in 2:19 to talk about animals, living creature, in Hebrew is nefesh chaya, which is the same word that's used when the text talks about human beings in 2:7, nefesh chaya. So when the breath of God goes into human beings, they become a living being, a nefesh chaya. And so animals are also called nefesh chaya, which implies, I think, that animals also have God's life breath in them. And so there's another connection when you think like God is connected to human beings at this intimate level of breath. God is also connected to wildebeests and lemmings or whatever at this
Right,
level.
and the wildebeests are connected to humans because
Exactly, yeah.
they're brought into, the humans are brought into creation to help the plants, and the animals are brought into creation to, support the humans, and yeah.
Exactly. The last thing that I wanted to say about that is just when the text talks about God forming humankind, the verb there is yatsar, which is
I love that. That's like my favorite thing in this chapter.
Yeah. Go ahead. What do you want to say about it?
I mean, I picture a pottery wheel. Like I picture some divine being sitting at a pottery wheel, like covered in this messy clay, like forming something in such an embodied and personal way.
Yeah. So the verb there, yatsar, in its noun form is yotzer, which means potter. And so what God is doing here to human beings and to animals is forming them in the ways that a potter forms the potter's artistic creation. So it's this very gritty, kind of tender, like self-invested image of God in relation to creatures.
Very different than the God who speaks and things come into existence. Yeah, it's a very different sense of God.
So at the beginning of this text, God had wanted a garden but couldn't plant one because there wasn't a person to till it. So one of the things that I always think is interesting about this text is that what God really wanted was a garden and needed a human being in order to get the garden, not the other way around, which is
That's true.
how we sometimes read it. And then at the very end here in verse 8, God puts the human being in the garden. And so the person, the human, is in the place that the person was created to be in relationship with, created to tend.
I just love the image of God placing the human in the garden. Like I picture like placing a butterfly on a flower or placing this is where you belong. This is where you'll thrive.
Yeah.
Or this is where I need you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think those things are related. This is where you'll thrive and this is where I need you. Like human beings will thrive when they are in relationship with creation in the ways that God needs and intends. So the Narrative Lectionary then moves us down to verse 15. We skip all the stuff about the rivers and where they flow, which, to be honest with you, I skipped that part.
I think yes, the Narrative Lectionary is not alone in skipping the rivers.
Last year, I remember we read that part of this text, and we came up with some pretty good stuff about locatedness and things but anyway, but not today. All right, so in chapter 2, verse 15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Dun, dun, dun.
Is there foreshadowing here?
So on the one hand, God gives human beings plentiful food. On the other hand, God places a tree specifically of the knowledge of good and evil, which is forbidden to them to eat. So help me start thinking about what to do with that.
Well, it's funny. I have this and now I have a conversation with myself going on in my head. Actually, it's like the little Bobby in my head. Do you have little characters in your head that are
definitely.
different people that are talking? Okay, so I have a little Bobby in my head who's already corrected
Rent free. Oh, yeah.
So my first thought was, now, why would you create a garden and put a person in there and then put a tree in the middle of the garden with fruit on it and tell them, don't eat that fruit?
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Is it a test?
Yeah.
And if it's a test, why doesn't the text tell us it's a test? The Bible tells us all the time that things are tests, but it does not say this is a test.
It doesn't. You're right.
So I guess that is the question that comes to my mind. And then the little Bobby in my head says, read it from the earth up, Amy.
That's what I was going to say!
I have a well-trained little Bobby in my head. No, well-formed, not well-trained.
Well-trained.
Okay, so well-trained. Do my bidding, Bobby. Okay. Okay, so help me think it through from the other angle, from the earth up then.
So this text establishes that human beings, like other animals, are formed from clay and have breath in them that comes from God. But human beings are not exactly, in our current life, we're not exactly like other animals. We are self-aware creatures who are capable of self-reflection and moral discernment in ways that squirrels, insofar as I know what's in the head of a squirrel, are not self-aware in the same way that human beings are. And so I think this text is trying to grapple with that kind of that awkward position of human beings as being a self-reflective animal, the animal who knows that we are going to die, and how do you live with that knowledge? That's what I think is happening in this text. And so we're going to get to that in chapter 3. And so it's just kind of dropping this in as a plot device to keep us motivated here. This is an idyllic world that has been created, and human beings could have lived in that world idyllically if only we had not gotten this gift that was not intended for us. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think it makes a lot of sense to sort of isolate the unique self-awareness that humans have, like self-consciousness of our condition. But it's interesting to posit that as a negative. I had always seen that as like, we are special. We're special because we have this awareness. We have a soul. We have we talk about our own sort of self-awareness in different kinds of ways. But to think about it posited here as I think where you're going is like, we only have this because we messed up.
Yeah.
Like in an ideal world, we would not have this. We would be just like the animals.
I mean, it creates all kinds of interesting reflections on that. Because, I mean, I think you're exactly right that kind of having this moral discernment is part of what is amazing about being human, part of this self-reflection. And, in Genesis 1, where it talks about human beings created in the image of God, I think that might be kind of what it's trying to get at, is human beings have this capacity that is different than other animals, and isn't that a wonderful thing? This text is sort of saying, we weren't meant to have that capacity. Isn't it a troubling thing? And so there is this two-edgedness, and it's interesting when we get to the next part of the text in chapter 3, like the way that you read Eve, the woman, is like, you can read her as sort of the great liberator of humankind who made us something other than like highly developed squirrels, or you can read her as the one who, disrupted the way human beings were created to be. But, if human beings had done what we were supposed to do, we would be non-self-aware, incapable of moral discernment, gardening a garden, and, there would be a lot of peacefulness in that, in the ways that the life of a squirrel is peaceful. But there would also be very much a lack in that, in terms of creativity and other kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I think there's a two-edgedness to the reality of human beings having awareness, and that these texts are kind of
I
grappling
love that.
with
I love putting it together with Genesis 1, where it is sort of created in the image of God, perhaps as a reflection of this sensibility that humans have. I also see in this passage, or I wonder, just in terms of, thinking of God as a character in the story.
Yeah.
And the people as characters, or the person as a character in the story. I see them sort of like, this is the beginning of their getting to know each other, and so maybe, I don't know. I'm sure this is heretical in many traditions, all the traditions. But like, I don't know, did God not realize that this is not a good strategy? Like, you've given humans free will and, created, I don't know, curious creatures or something like that. So to put this tree in there, like, did God not see that this was going to happen? Maybe legitimately not. And so I see this as like a very like naive beginning to, like, you have a new puppy and you just, tell the puppy don't chew on things and see how that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a troubling point in this text. And then, you kind of end up, I think, with two options-ish. One is that God really didn't know what God was doing, or God did not anticipate the outcome. Mm-hmm. The other is that this is a test that God has put in place intentionally. Mm-hmm. And if God knew that human beings were going to fail the test, then it was sort of like a justification for the things that God wanted to do anyway, I guess. But But I like where you're going, where, you know, I prefer that kind of God didn't know what human beings were going to do. And God kind of trusted that human beings could handle this. And, you know, this is the way the Hebrew Bible unfolds all the way through, is that there's this kind of covenantal relationship between God and humanity in one way or another. And what humankind does is never predetermined by what God wishes humankind to do. And God's always adapting to people, and people are always adapting to God. And they're two subjects who have their own autonomy in their relationship, and then they have to respond to one another. I really like that view of humanity as not just woodenly doing whatever God said, but as developing their own kind of personality.
Yeah, I like that. I can see how it makes some people uncomfortable, but...
Yeah, no, for sure. I've been a dog owner for, you know, a long time, and a parent fairly recently. And one of the reflections about being a dog owner versus being a parent is I always want my dogs to do what I tell them to do. I do not want my dogs to grow up to be independent of me. Like, I want my dogs to be obedient. But my child, you know, I set limits and frameworks for her, but I want her to be able to explore and challenge and push boundaries, because at some point she needs to be able to, like, be her own person. And so in some ways I think of this text as like, initially God had intended that the relationship God had to humans would be more like I have with my dog. And where it ends up is more like I have with my child, who sometimes drives me nuts, but most of the time I find to be a really wonderful relationship, but that I'm not in control of.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right, that you're not in control of. You're the parent, but you are a parent who is responsive to your actual child and who that child is. And, like, to some extent, you know, you can say we are with our pets too, but you're right, it's different. You know, we have our parenting plans, and then we have our actual children, you know, and we recognize that we have to work with who they are in the world, not who we wish they were or who we planned on them being. Yeah. I like all of that. I think that helps us read this text.
The last thing I was going to ask about, which maybe should have been the first thing, was this tree is specifically called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I've been kind of working with one way of understanding that, which is that it's about moral discernment and self-consciousness. There are other ways of reading what knowledge of good and evil means. Do you read it similarly to me, or do you have other ways of getting at it?
I mean, I guess I see it as sort of like the tree that, I don't know, it's like holds the end of your sort of naive state.
Yeah.
Like it takes you out of naivete, whatever that means. So it can be a sort of ignorance is bliss. It can be awareness of your own consciousness in the world. It can be the desire to make your own decisions. Maybe it's related to free will.
Yeah.
It's the tree is somehow directly connected to coming out of this naivete.
Yeah, I like that. One can read good and evil as like a merism, so like basically like A to Z, like covers the ends and anticipates the middle. And so one can read this more narrowly, like I've been doing, as specifically the knowledge is about ethics, like what is good and what is evil. But one can also read it as simply being about knowledge of all things, both the good things and the bad things. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it makes too much difference in terms of where you end up as an interpreter, but it is open to both of those kind of readings. Okay, so the Narrative Lectionary is going to move us on down to chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. One thing that could be important later, depending on how one reads chapter 3, is that in the narrative sequence, the prohibition to the tree is given when there is only one creature in the world, and that is the human being, the man,
Correct.
the Adam. And then animals are created, and then woman is created, and then comes the story of actually eating from the tree. And so the woman, properly speaking, the Isha, did not exist at the time when the prohibition was given, which could be relevant here in a minute.
It's definitely relevant.
Or maybe not, but you say
It's
this.
relevant.
All right. Okay, so chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, But God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." All right, here we meet our serpent.
We sure do.
What should we say? What do you want to say about the serpent?
I think his rhetorical approach is so interesting.
Yeah.
That he starts with a question to which the answer is no, God didn't say that. But
Yes.
he starts with, did God say this incredibly strict thing?
Yeah.
Like you're surrounded by all of this fruit and you can't eat it? And no, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
But then Eve's response is also more strict than what God actually said.
How so?
That you can't touch the tree.
Yeah.
It's not just that you can't eat it, it's that you can't touch it. You know, when I talk about this portion with students in my congregation who might have this as a bar bat mitzvah portion or something like that, we talk a lot about when it's helpful to have rules given to us that are actually stricter than the most important thing.
Yeah.
To sort of make sure that you don't cross that boundary, like have a wider fence around the Torah, as we say in the Jewish community, versus when your rules are so strict that you just give up on following them, or that you're looking for a reason not to follow them. Like if you were to say, I'm not going to have any carbs anymore ever. Or if you put a really strict physical distancing protocol upon yourself in this time of COVID and say, I'm not leaving my house at all. I will not step outside my house.
Yeah.
That's really difficult to keep. And so there might be one day that you're just like, oh, forget it. And you go hog wild.
That's really interesting. So the command that God gave was actually fairly reasonable, but the way that it's been interpreted by both the serpent and the woman is more restrictive, which makes her less likely to want to follow it because it's kind of exhausting to follow a rigid rule.
That's what I wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that's what's going on here. And it does make, I think your question earlier about, did God ever even talk to Eve about this?
Yeah.
Or were these instructions put in the Zoom chat before you join the call?
Yeah.
You can't see those instructions. And so was it that she's remembering it as stricter than whatever Adam told her, or Adam made it more strict when he told her? Yeah, how did she arrive at this? It seems like in some important way she has missed the most fundamental thing was really just about the eating.
It's so interesting to watch the serpent's approach. He's described here as, in the NRSV, as crafty or shrewd. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The word there, by the way, in Hebrew is arum. And the word for naked, which is what Adam and Eve are, is arom, which are the same consonants but a different vowel pattern. And so there's this kind of wordplay here that's showing the nakedness, I think, is parallel to naivete for human beings. Mm-hmm. So they're naive. The serpent is crafty, and these are being this is the fundamental kind of interaction that's taking place here. It is so interesting to me. One way of reading this text is that the serpent doesn't actually know what God said. And so is trying to sort of, or else is just trying, instead of, one of the things you do if you're crafty is you don't give away too much of what you already know, I guess is one way of reading it. So by asking a question, which he may or may not know is the wrong question, he finds out what the woman knows or what the woman thinks she knows. I like what you're saying with the woman and leaving out the most important bits and getting the "you shall not touch it" wrong. That's going to be important in just a second, the touching of it, I think. But she also doesn't talk about it as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She just talks about it as the tree in the middle of the garden. And it's not clear to me whether she knows but just didn't bother to say, or whether she doesn't actually know what that tree is. She's just sort of been told, don't touch that tree over there.
Right. And so it becomes a sort of arbitrary rule that you're just trying to remember, something that's fairly abstract.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then when the serpent says, no, you're going to get knowledge of good and evil, this is new and exciting information maybe to her.
Yeah.
To say oh, I didn't know that I could, have that godlike capacity. It's interesting to watch the way just watch the way the serpent kind of manipulates the situation with her.
It's so interesting. And it really It reminds me of like specific moments from when I was a young child, and I felt very aware that like I didn't really understand what was going on, and I knew that there were rules that I was supposed to follow that I like sort of sometimes I really understood them and sometimes they were very hazy. And these like specific moments of trying to navigate what is it I'm supposed to be doing? Like I want to do what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's not clear to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel clear to me.
So both the like, what is it I'm supposed to be doing, and what's the rationale behind, like, what is the principle that animates this thing I'm supposed to be doing?
And I think the rationale, at least for me, the rationale helps me remember what the thing is I'm not supposed to do.
Right, yeah.
Because you can remember the general principles and then they apply in many cases. But if you're just taught rules that are floating around in the ether and not connected to anything, it's hard to remember what they are.
Now, what the serpent then does is to say, look, you're not going to die if you eat the fruit. You're going to gain this godlike quality of knowledge of good and evil. And God doesn't want you to have that. God is protecting that for God's self.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an interesting way of kind of enticing her towards eating this fruit, to say, here's this capacity that God is trying to withhold from you, but here it's available to you. Thoughts about that kind of the boundary there of human God, God's like protecting God's boundaries and humans wanting to cross. Like there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and it makes me think, it makes me wonder again, what personal familiarity with God does Eve have?
Yeah.
Because if God is sort of a somewhat abstract authority figure, and this serpent is right there speaking to her, I can see how she might have had a different experience than Adam, for example, because Adam has had this. We know from the text that Adam has had this direct contact with God. We don't know about Eve.
I find it really interesting that the temptation here for humankind is to become more like gods. Like this capacity for knowledge is something that humans are kind of driven toward, to want to understand, to want to be aware, to want to be in control. I think the text is really naming something important there about how, like human beings, we're always trying to sort of supersede ourselves. We're always trying to move or progress toward some, we're always seeking progress.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's look and see what the woman then does in verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Okay, so talk to me about this progression in verse 6 of the woman deciding to eat the fruit and give it to her husband.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that the vision, like the sense of the visual.
Yeah.
In the way it's described, that she saw that the tree was good for eating, and it was a delight to the eyes.
Yeah.
So she was tempted just sort of by the vision of it, and then also that it was desirable as a source of wisdom.
Yeah.
And it seems that she ate and gave to Adam to eat in pretty quick succession, or at least the text doesn't record anything happening in her mind in between the moment that she ate and the moment that Adam ate.
Yeah.
And then we also don't know if Adam knows what this fruit is.
I mean, so I was raised with this image of this text that Adam was off somewhere else doing something like, tilling the garden or something, and Eve was having this conversation with the serpent by herself. And so when he came and got the fruit, when she brought the fruit to him, he didn't know what it was. He didn't know that it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He thought maybe it was, the fruit from one of the other trees. But the text doesn't say that. The text says that she gave it to her husband who was with her. And so, at least in my reading, he's been standing there this whole time and has heard the conversation that's going on, didn't choose to intervene in any way, just takes it and eats it because it's offered to him. So in my mind, this text is not trying to blame one of them over the other. It's trying to sort of say these two human beings who were partnered made a bad decision here.
Yeah, and if anything, the fact that Eve wasn't present for the initial instructions, may or may not have had personal contact with God, makes her, I would say, less responsible for having understood the initial imperative and made sure that it's followed.
No, I think that absolutely can be read that way. One of the things that I think is interesting here, and I don't know if this text wants me to think this is interesting, but, what can you do, is, so she had said that if you touch the fruit, you'll die. And then she takes the fruit, and she doesn't die. And so then she eats it. So I have often wondered when I read this text if that sort of misunderstanding, when she grabs it, she's waiting to, get electrocuted. And then she's like, oh, the serpent was right.
It was okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bobby, why is there a serpent in this garden? This is Eden.
Yeah.
Like, this is the good place. Like the actual good place, not like the good place and the good place.
Yeah.
Okay, you know what this reminds me of? This is what this reminds me of. Wells Fargo. I'm going to explain. So, I hope for your own sake you do not have a lot of experience working with Wells Fargo. But the employees at my branch are wonderful people. They have their set of instructions. But it is very clear that if anything deviates from exactly what their 5 anticipated transactions are, they have no idea how the back end of the system works. They cannot really help you navigate the bureaucracy. They're really disconnected from the back end. They can only do a couple of things.
Yeah.
And that's the position that I feel like at least Eve is in at this point in the text. She's been given some instructions that are a little abstract. And then she's also given a serpent who says, no, that's not true. And look, as you're saying, when you touch the fruit, nothing happens. And so to expect her to be able to adjudicate properly in that situation, I don't think... I think this is just a case for why the people on the front end need access to the back end. I think this is a case for if we as human beings are going to be expected to discern in situations what to do, we need more information than just that sort of surface level instruction.
Yeah.
The more I'm reading this text with you today, the more I feel like the tradition in both Judaism and Christianity of really holding Eve responsible for this and seeing it as a sin. Judaism doesn't have this idea of one big original sin. We don't go quite down that road, but it was not the right thing to do. But it just feels unfair to me the more we dig into it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I love what you're saying about the problem here seems to be some kind of, at one level is a lack of information. It's a lack of knowledge. And the thing that this tree is actually, in fact, offering is knowledge. And so, naivety is dangerous in that sense. And so this tree kind of solves that problem at the same time that it creates all kinds of other problems.
Yeah.
And so this, I think that what we were talking about earlier about the kind of ambiguous nature of human beings becoming more like gods or having this kind of capacity for awareness. There is a two-edgedness to it. It's the lack of knowledge that gets them in trouble. But then the having knowledge is also, it creates its own kind of trouble for them. The question of why is there a serpent in the garden, I think, is a really good one. And, this is the second time we've seen this idyllic creation of Eden, which, first of all, has a tree that can kill you. And second of all, has a serpent
but it's very pretty and right in the middle of the garden.
It's beautiful, yeah. And it has a serpent that can manipulate you. And, in later tradition, in both in Judaism and Christianity, in certain strands of it anyway, the serpent becomes associated with Satan. But in the text, it's not. It's just this really smart snake who has legs and can talk, but is crafty. And serpents in the ancient world often were kind of viewed as these kind of mystical creatures who sometimes were immortal because they keep shedding their skin over and over. They were wise and crafty. So this is a trope that is not only in the Bible, but also in other texts. And I mean, without the serpent, it would be a really boring story. Like,
Well, that's true.
humankind would just like be tilling the garden
That's true.
still. So, but it is interesting that even like the illusion of perfection of creation is never quite perfect. There's always some kind of tension there.
Yeah.
Now, when Adam and Eve eat the fruit, it says their eyes were open. So they suddenly see something they weren't able to see. And the way that's described is they realized they were naked. And so they sewed clothes for themselves. Any thoughts about that, about nakedness being the first thing that they become aware of?
It just makes me sad because it's like this tapping into this like inherent sense of shame that so many of us have. Like, it's just their body. God made the body. Like, what? Why would they be ashamed that they're walking around in their body?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it turned on this whole system of the ways that we, I don't know, judge ourselves or feel ashamed of ourselves, even exactly as we were created.
Yeah. That was so interesting. Our teacher from Emory, Carol Newsom, talks about this as, it sounds weird if you were to say like, hey, that squirrel is naked. That sounds really weird. But I mean, squirrels are naked, right? But they don't feel the need to wear clothes because they're not sort of aware of their own nakedness.
Right. Those categories don't really exist for them.
So this is part of the argument that what humans were before this moment was kind of more related to the way we understand animals as not self-conscious in both the having consciousness and also like having a sense of shame, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And so this moment, suddenly human beings become capable of reflecting on ourselves from outside ourselves and recognizing like, oh, we really, like, we are naked. It's a concept that wouldn't have occurred to us before. And what you're saying, I think, is really important is with that knowledge comes shame, comes anxiety, comes, if they become aware here of the possibility of death, which is not stated in this text, but to me, that's part of what the knowledge of good and evil likely entails. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, human life has become fraught in all kinds of ways that it was not before, simply because, like, with knowledge comes all of these other things that can be bad. We now have knowledge that we don't know how to handle.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think this text is trying to get at is the reason this kind of knowledge was reserved for gods is because gods know how to handle this kind of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Human beings were not created for this kind of knowledge, but now we have it and look at all the problems that it can cause, even while it makes our life richer in some ways. Mm-hmm. Now then God shows back up in the garden. We haven't seen God in the garden since the very beginning when God was creating all the things, but maybe God was there a lot, or maybe God was just, I don't know. But when God shows up this time, the man and his wife hide themselves among the trees. Any thoughts about where that text ends, where that text leaves us as opposed to where we started?
I mean, I get it's sad. Like, it just hiding to me is like the ultimate embodiment of shame and feeling that you are, that you are inherently not enough. And, we're not going to go on to read the text, but when God says, "Why are you hiding?" Adam says, "Because we're naked."
Yeah.
Not because I ate the fruit. And
right.
I don't know if he's telling the truth there or if he's still trying to hide the fact that he ate the fruit. But it seems that the shame they feel is for something that they should not feel ashamed about.
No, I think that's an important point. It's not we did something wrong and therefore we're hiding. It's we're naked and we don't want you to see us naked.
Right. You who created these bodies, we don't want you to see them.
We were talking about at the beginning of the text, this kind of how this text has set up all of these relationships. And primary among them is this kind of intimate relationship between human beings and God, who formed us with God's hands and breathed into us with God's breath. And there's a sense of like deep interconnectedness. And then here we get this kind of first taste of there's now a barrier between human beings and God. I mean, an actual barrier of, trees they're hiding behind, but also this more sort of metaphorical sense of self-awareness and shame and all of these kinds of things that make us embarrassed to be seen for who we really are. When we go on in the text, so there's also going to be animosity between the human beings and the serpent. There's going to be difficulty between man and wife. There's going to be difficulty between human beings and the ground. Like all of these relationships that were created in Genesis 2 get upended by the end of Genesis 3. And so the ultimate result of this eating of the tree of the fruit of knowledge in that sense is the fracturing of this sense of deep interconnection of all creation.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's spot on.
So as always, especially when we're reading Hebrew Bible text, which is where you and I are both kind of most at home, there's a lot more that one could say about this text. But our time is upon us, and so our practice at BibleWorm is to try to draw some conclusions about the significance of the text for our lives and the lives of our communities. So as we end our conversation about this text, where is your head about how this connects to our own communities?
You know, as is often the case, I come into the conversation thinking, oh, here will be a nice, tidy conclusion. And then over the course of our conversation, it sort of unravels and re-ravels itself in different ways.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you where I am at this moment. I think it's a sad story, and I think it is a story of the unraveling of these connections that are so beautifully crafted and carefully crafted at the beginning of the story. But I also think I'm not feeling a lot of blame for Adam and Eve. I am feeling like Eden could not have worked this way. Like it almost self-destructed. You can't create a garden and say this is a place of ease and perfection, but there's a tree that if you eat the fruit and it's in the middle of the garden and it's beautiful, but don't eat the fruit because you'll die. And also here's a tricky serpent, and like God may or may not communicate your like it couldn't have worked in the way that it all went down. And the reason that's helpful for me is if I can step away from that blaming and that sense of shame as a human being that humans have failed in this divine endeavor to fill a certain role, it helps me to apply it to communal life now. And honestly, where I come to with that is that I think communities, religious communities or household communities or cities or, you know, whatever community you might want to think of, we get ourselves into the worst messes, Bobby.
Yeah.
Like really traumatic messes where, I mean, I'm sure that you have had, I know I have had moments in community where all you can feel is the fracture. All you can feel is the connections that used to feel so real, and all of a sudden they're gone because there is shame or because there is moral injury or because, you know, there is betrayal. All these different things you could say are happening in this story. But this is not where the Bible ends. This is where it starts.
Oh, yeah.
You know? Like, you can pick up from that and figure out what's next. And what's next is not going to go on as if this never happened. Like, this did happen, but you can move through it. Like, you can figure out, like, okay, well, we've all learned something from this. Like, we've learned about the capacity of humans and the capacity of the divine and the capacity of the serpent and tried to, you know, put new guardrails in place. And now we're going to try again. Like, we live in a messy world, and I don't use the language of a fallen world. I know that other communities do, but I think it's almost possible to read a hopefulness in this by seeing that this is the beginning of the Bible and not the end.
I love that, and I especially love the way that you said that Eden was never going to work. Like, that's such a stark way of putting that, but it makes so much sense of the text. There was always going to be this tree that was going to cause a problem. There was always this serpent who was going to be crafty and cause a problem. It was never going to work. And it relieves you of this sense of some kind of like idyllic past to which we are trying desperately to return. And then the story becomes more it becomes an acknowledgement of the complexity of human life and the relationships of people with one another, with creation, with plants and animals, and with God. It acknowledges that it is inherently a complicated thing. I love that. That really, really helps. In my mind, one of the things that's coming out of this conversation is that this text is grappling with the human tendency or the human temptation to always want to transcend ourselves, to like be something greater than what we perceive ourselves to be. And it is that moment of sort of being aware that we could be something more than we are that creates the sense of shame about who we are in this moment.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I think there's this real, in my own experience, that is kind of true to my experience of being human, is I'm always feeling like this pressure to be and do more, and to like, I'm a person. Like there's that language, you're not a human being, you're a human becoming, which I like in some sense, that, like there's always possibility. But I also worry that idea suggests that we are never enough the way that we are. And when people see who we currently are, it becomes shameful to us if in that framework. And so I love what you said, human beings, after they eat the fruit, are embarrassed for God to see them, when God is the one who created the bodies that they are in, exactly the way God wanted them. And yet they say, oh, these bodies are not good enough to be seen by God. And so that the restlessness of the human spirit, I think, is one of the things this text is grappling with. And on the one hand, there is a real richness to that restlessness, because it does push us to do and be and become more. There is a possibility of some kind of progress. But this text is really wrestling with the negative side of that tendency, which can result in alienation from God, from the earth, from each other. And I think ultimately, in that sense of being embarrassed by nakedness, it's an alienation from ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't even feel like connected to who I am. I mean, I don't know exactly what the takeaway, like what's the point that you write down and stick in your pocket and read it later this week. I don't know for sure, but recognizing that this text, I think, is saying something true about how that quest to be more than we currently are can have these kind of negative effects on us and on our communities and on our relationships and on our world. And I think part of the goal of being in community is to see each other for who we are, and to allow ourselves to be seen for who we are, not expecting each other to always be more than we are, not hiding our true selves behind the tree, I don't think we can ever go back to Eden in that sense, and maybe we wouldn't want to go back to Eden in that sense. But there is something really beautiful about that idea that we were created to be in relationship. And in that beginning, like being someone who tills the garden was enough. Like it was the only thing in that story.
Right.
And it's the sense that we need to be more than that. And so if we could let go for ourselves and each other of that sense that we always need to be more, and just lean into who we are in relationship, I think that could sort of approximate anyway what that initial creation was supposed to be about.
I think it's really true that this kind of self-consciousness, this self-awareness, also pulls us out of ourselves in the present and puts us in sort of a position of critique of ourselves or critique of the situation. And it makes us, I had always heard slightly different. You said human being and human becoming. I had always heard you're not a human doing, you're a human being, which is sort of
I like that a lot better.
Flip of that, right? That's more the message you're going for. But yeah, it is hard to be a human being. And I actually have heard from, I don't garden myself, I'm horrible, but I have heard from many people who do that just having your hands in the soil and really gardening in that kind of intimate way does help them sort of drop into themselves in this moment and feel present and complete, just being.
Yeah. Now, I was saying at the beginning, totally unrelated, I think, to this, but that my wife and I had a flower bed planted in our front just a couple of weeks ago. Partly, I think, for that reason, like it was just something that connected us back to the earth. My ability as a gardener is that I can stand out there with a hose and like squirt water. But even
an important job.
Even that is like, it feels meditative to me, and like I'm doing my part to like help something else grow and thrive, and like it settles me, and it makes like it's kind of amazing, even as poor a gardener as I am, that there really is something to that.
Yeah, I think if people can find the things in the world that help them feel their place in creation just by virtue of their being, that's really important. And that, I think that's especially, it's always important, but I think it can be especially important as we all weather the stress of a pandemic. Just to figure out how to be.
Yeah. Well, Amy, it is so good to be back talking to you about biblical texts.
Yes, it's great fun.
We should say that new for season 2, we have started a Patreon account with some really exciting stuff. You can find us at patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast. First of all, it's just super helpful to us if you are somebody who listens to our podcast and wants to support us. You can give us just a few dollars a month and we'll be grateful, and we'll send you a super cool BibleWorm sticker.
It is actually a really cool sticker.
It is cool. I love it. Yeah. So do that. We also have lots of interesting little rewards at different levels. So you can get extended episodes where you get to hear all of the witty banter that banters its way onto the cutting room floor. You can get the podcast a week before everyone else gets it. You can become part of the BibleWorm Collaborative, where we talk together about what the texts are going to do in the next month. You can get liturgies that go with the BibleWorm podcast. You can get a Sunday school or Bible study lecture that goes with the podcast.
You know, needless to say, doing this podcast is a labor of love, and we really enjoy doing it and pouring our hearts into it. And we are not looking to make money. We are looking to cover the expenses we have begun to incur in producing this podcast. So if you're able to kick in a little bit and help us do that, it will really help us to continue to pour our love into this effort.
Indeed. So we will be here again next week reading, I believe we're in Genesis 15 and the promise to Abraham.
I think that's right.
All right, y'all. It's
Well,
good
I
to be
look
back.
forward
Thanks
to
for
it.
listening.
We will be back with you next week. Y'all take care.
Thanks for joining us for this special extended episode of BibleWorm. If you'd like to get access to extended episodes every week, just join our Patreon at the extended worm level or higher. You'll also find other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more, starting at just $4 per month. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
We really are grateful to all our supporters for helping us to keep the podcast going. A special thank you to our executive producer, Fox Valley Presbyterian Church in Geneva, Illinois, and to our newest supporters, Alex Bruning, Stephanie Anthony, Leon Lance, Team Wilkins, Julie Holm, Tom Harris, Lori Shorter, David Eppelsheimer, and Judy Wang.
We hope you'll join us again next week when we discuss God's covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15, 1-6. Until then, keep on digging.